Hello, everyone. Welcome to No Single Path podcast, where we celebrate our unconventional career journeys and deep dive into leadership insights and explore how technology is shaping the future of work. I'm your host Madhuri Desu, and today we are diving deep with program management and the future of AI with the industry leaders, two incredible leaders in this space, Priyanka Shinde and Arvind Gangadharan. Priyanka is a leader in strategic execution, transformation, and program management. She is the author of Art of Strategic Execution. We just finished 1 year anniversary, right? Just this week. And it's a must read for anyone looking to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. And she has led multiple large scale programs across industries and knows what it takes to turn vision into reality. And my another guest is Arvind. He's a leadership expert and career transformation coach who, who helps professionals to foolproof their careers. With a deep background in program management and leadership, he specializes in guiding professionals through change, growth, and adapting in emerging technologies. Some of the key terms that we really need in this crazy market right now. And Priyanka and Arvind, thank you very much for taking time to have this insightful conversation with me today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you for having
Thank you.
us.
So, setting the stage, right? So, at the get go, from a program management perspective, it is evolving, especially with AI's growing role. But before we go deep into AI and everything, there is a confusion between what is program management, project management, and portfolio management. Could you define what these key terms are, Priyanka?
Sure. Yeah, anytime you start talking about uh, program management or technical program management, there is always this confusion. So glad you brought the question up. Um, According to me, when I think about, and I don't know, I think we did this sort of a differentiation way back in the early days at Facebook, Arvind, when we were trying to do a lot of what's the right term, like awareness for TPM. So going back to your question, from my perspective, project is usually like a finite set of things that need to be done. It has a start and it has an end, and usually
Mm-hmm.
that's the only thing that's being done, and it's a singular focus. So that's project, and so if you're managing a project, usually one project at a time, it's project management, and there's a project manager. Program is a collection of interdependent projects. So I would say, somewhere these projects, they are connected to each other. So if I were to give an example, like a single project would be maybe, and I've written a blog post, I'm just going to pick the example from there that comes to mind, which is you're just launching, say, Google Maps in
Mm-hmm.
one city or something like that. It's a very specific thing, and you have that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you can think of it like version one kind of a thing. And then if you're doing the same thing, multiple languages, multiple countries, that now becomes like it's all interconnected, and then you're adding more features on it. These are all multiple little projects, and that
Yeah.
form a program. And then a portfolio is essentially a collection of programs. So if you're heading a particular area or a vertical within your company, you probably have multiple programs, and somebody is also looking at that broader perspective. So that's just a quick differentiation of the key terms that you asked for.
Great. Arvind?
Yeah, I think completely agree with Priyanka. It's essentially an escalating set of responsibilities if I look at it, right? And so I think what skills get called on to execute on each. So if you're doing project management versus program management versus portfolio management, I think the skills
Mm-hmm.
that get called into question are slightly going to be different. And then you might typically look at assigning the right seniority of people into these types of engagements as well.
Mm-hmm.
With the program, obviously, you may not go really deep. You may have to stay at the horizontal kind of peripheral level, and then look at how all of these different projects are leading to these outcomes. And I think the key thing is being able to anticipate issues, risks, and dependencies between these projects, and how they all are going to cascade and cause some outcome delays or milestone delays and stuff like that. So that, I think, is the key differentiator as well from a leader when I'm looking to like staff up somebody in a project versus a program. Those are things that I might look at as well. And in fact, I might even come back and say, hey, a project can be something that you just self-organize as a team. You probably don't need an individual to maybe like shepherd this whole thing along. Like, we all kind of do project management in our day-to-day lives, right? So that's the one point I'll maybe add to that.
That's great. And when we think about these program management, the next big question is about OKRs, organization key results, right? Like the big OKRs, how, they are the key framework for execution, and every organization go through that and to set a vision for the team and how we are going to deliver things. And AI is also changing the way organizations could define and track them. How do you think AI is reshaping the way companies envision and align OKRs? Priyanka?
Yeah, when I think of OKRs, I think of them as a framework, especially for planning, because then having that leads to obviously a smoother execution. So when you have really strong objectives and key results, then you understand what's the direction you're going in. And when I think of AI impacting OKRs, I'm kind of thinking of it in two ways. One is, how has AI really changed the strategy and in as a result OKRs for companies? Because since November 2022, as generative AI specifically has come in, a lot of companies have had to redefine their OKRs. When you think of OKRs and strategies as like 3 to 5 year thing, every company has had to shift that. And so really impacting and having the companies to rethink, what is our objective now? What should be our strategy? How does our strategy change, right? So that didn't impact on the OKRs for any company. And then the great thing about AI is, and we'll talk more about this probably, is how it has really helped us automate a lot of things, make us more productive. And so when I think about tracking ARs as part of execution, then it's great that AI can help automate some of that. So as long as you have the right data, as long as you're putting in some of the data, AI can also like pull in the information, give you insights, and really be able to share how are these OKRs progressing, are, what is the future trend on it look like? Do we need to make any changes? So it can help us grade it and things. Again, it reduces the workload during execution. But that's kind of the initial thinking around just how AI and OKRs could sort of benefit.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll add a couple of things. So interestingly, I work right now for an organization where we don't set OKRs at all, and we don't kind of really believe in that framework. In fact, I think there's a great podcast that Lenny and our CEO Toby did about like how he thinks about measurements and setting these KPIs and all of that. But then I worked in organizations where the OKR framework is exceptionally like sacrosanct. Like even it has to be set in stone at the start of a quarter. If you do any sort of changes to it, then it has to kind of go through a pretty rigorous change management mechanism. If you're like obviously changing goals and all of that. But I think what AI can probably do is, if you really connect it to, I think what Priyanka was saying, like really connect it to all the right kind of data sources, the right kind of instrumentation, the right kind of monitoring, you can probably start to predict and say, hey, maybe this is not the right goal. Maybe this is not the right metric to measure. Maybe it is time for us to take a look at changing this, right? And it is not just maybe monitoring and assessing internal factors, but hopefully it can also assess external factors and see maybe the market's moving, maybe the economy is tanking, and maybe that requires a change. Like for example, in a Coinbase, obviously we go through crypto summers and crypto winters, and it can change pretty quickly, massively. And so what we may have started off in Q1 may not be what Q3 looks like, and we may be in a full-blown winter, and all the numbers might look very different. So dynamically being able to adjust these things and then reducing the amount of toil that it takes to actually go up the chain and ask for these changes, I think that would be a big one, right? And then the second thing is usually OKRs obviously are set at different levels, but at a company level, these OKRs usually have a bunch of dependencies across multiple product teams. And so if you really break it down to the right granularity, it can also maybe start predicting that, hey, this KR or this specific result that maybe this product team is driving is very unlikely to hit its goals. In which case, the overall OKR may also be at the risk of hitting those milestones and goals. And so some sort of that dependency management as well. Otherwise, today I think the program managers do a lot of these coordination conversations just to ensure that these OKRs are in sync, and it maybe gets set up in some sort of a static system that again is always something that as a human you're kind of changing and tweaking. But can you hook it to the right systems, the right data, the right kind of tools that you're using that actually starts to predict some of these misalignment happening before it actually leads to like a full blown escalation, right? So I think a lot of that is probably where we can leverage this and really look at elevating our involvement higher up the value chain.
I think this also teases to my next question is prioritization. Obviously, with once we have this OKRs, and it will give that insights to say that, hey, this because the market is shifting or whatever else is happening, this objective or this key result might not be the right one, or how do you want to prioritize? So as a program manager, that's the key function a person has to have a note of, like, okay, what else is going on, what is the risk assessment, and what are the milestones that might be slipping or something else that needs to be changed. So what do you think when one of the major challenge for the program managers is prioritization, because when we are looking at these large scale programs with lot many stakeholders, lot many interdependencies going on, do you think AI, with integrating AI into program management, actually help them to get a better visibility and a better traction in how to track all of these prioritization impacts?
Yeah, I can share a couple of pointers on that. So I feel like one, prioritization is a problem generally. I mean, it is hard
Yes.
for not just program managers, but everybody involved in the program,
Mm-hmm.
or even the owner of the company, or like, the
Yeah.
leaders in the company, because there is so much that needs to be done. And so usually everything becomes important. And so really having ruthless prioritization
Mm-hmm.
is very, very important. And um, you need to have like a mindset around it, and maybe there are some frameworks that can be used, which we have today. There are multiple frameworks,
Mm-hmm.
simplest being like value versus complexity, or revenue versus like the effort, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
um, However, when we start thinking about how AI can really help, like an example I can think of is for for instance, there might be a lot of customer data coming in, and maybe there's feedback around your product and different features on the product. And so
Mm-hmm.
now, earlier, you would have to sift through all of that data manually. There could be some ways you could categorize and things like that, but
Mm-hmm.
there was somebody who had to go through it and then pull up like what are the insights out of this, and then say, okay, maybe we should prioritize this, right? And so now AI can really help you synthesize that data. It could help summarize some of these insights and then say, here, based on this data, we should actually think of fixing this in this particular priority order. So
Mm.
AI can definitely help with some of those things, and like really in reinforcing and utilizing the data that you may already have. Um, at the same time, I still feel like there is a lot of like uh, skill that a program manager or a product manager can bring in to really then also look at some of these other things. And maybe there are also ways that AI can tie these things together. So prioritization from a program management perspective can also happen on how much time is this going to take? Is this a low hanging fruit versus
Mm-hmm.
does it require a lot more effort? And so are there like, slight
Mm-hmm.
tweaks in the prioritization that we can do? But I do want to say one thing at the end of it, like, prioritization and like doing something, say, oh, we want to do this. For example, a lot of companies are saying we want to implement AI, like that's a priority. However, we have to go back to asking this question and like, what is the problem we are trying to solve? What is the objective? So going back to that, because really that can help you inform on the prioritization rather than something like we just need to do this. So that's something I would just wanted to say as we talk about prioritization, because it's important to understand the why behind any of the prioritization as well.
So,
Arvind?
so my take on this is this may be one of the harder problems to solve for with AI, because I think this is where a lot of the org dynamics kind of comes into play, right? Like how does, and I mean, for lack of a better word, there's a lot of horse trading that happens at every quarterly planning boundary. And so yeah, you adjust resourcing, you adjust priorities, you maybe give some, you take some, and so a lot of that's like really dependent on the culture of the organization. But if I were to be looking at this from, okay, can I build a product that maybe automate some of this, then I think to Priyanka's point, if we are able to establish like clear first principles on how we think about the priority across the organization, we're able to align on a specific framework that we're going to use, like RICE or value or all of that. And then basically what we do as program managers in prioritization is really bring data to the leadership and say, here is how all the data is kind of stacking up. Here is how we'll think about trade-offs. Here is why I think this wins over this in terms of like overall priority. And so that data is usually what we use for a lot of these arguments and discussions. So if that can actually be automated and the systems actually like surfacing out of this and saying, here is all the data, because based on the first principles and the framework we established and the data that I have access to, I think this thing ranks slightly higher than the other one, right? So then you're actually taking out all of the human involvement with that and saying, hey, here's what the empirical data is kind of telling you. But then leaders can usually, I mean, actually use that information and maybe then go into the art of prioritization thing. Maybe this is what I feel from my gut, that this is probably going to have a lot more landed impact, because it might be a complete greenfield opportunity, and then the algorithm itself may not have any idea about like what the impact of that can be. But it might be better for a leader who's worked in this space to kind of say, no, I think this one's probably better. So that's where I think the art of prioritization can leverage all of those data aspects and maybe make like better decisions. But I still think this might be one of those harder problems that can't quite be solved for. It can aid in the process, because I
Mhm.
truly think that this is almost an art than a science.
Great. I think that's where art of strategic execution comes into picture, Priyanka.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that definitely the name came from that. There isn't like, one or way to do certain things. And so
Yeah.
Yeah.
when I thought about a title for the book, um, the art was definitely something that was very, very much
Yeah.
up front and center, right? Because there's
Yes.
so much nuance to this role, like Arvind is saying, and so much like all of these things going on that can't really be captured in a way with just like, oh, here's how you do if A, B, then C, or something like that.
That's right. So AI, as we are discussing, right? So AI is not just a tool, but it's influencing the leadership styles, and it is a technology that is evolving and growing, and it is aiding. And there could be some more problems and challenges because it's a growing technology. So, from a leadership perspective, how should a program leader adapt their leadership approach in an AI-powered environment?
Maybe I can take this one. I think there are a couple of things, and this is something I've been chatting with my team here as well. There are two ways I'm thinking about it right now. One is, I think to Priyanka's point earlier, every organization wants to embrace AI and figure out, okay, how do I create something that is leveraging the new capabilities that we've explored in the last maybe year or so.
Mhm.
And then there's obviously a market element to that as well. You have to have an AI strategy and all that. But and so for doing that, like our TPMs, our product teams, our engineers, our TPMs are all going to be called on to really think about our existing capabilities in the team, sorry, in the organization. So, what does the data architecture look like? What do we have access to? What all have we instrumented? What are the models that can actually, train on that data, and what kind of insights can we get? And then, based on all of that, how can we think about creating the right set of products and features, right? And so a big change that I think a lot of really technical leaders are talking about is this change from you have a bunch of menu items and a bunch of buttons you click to really going into a declarative type of an interface that says, I want to do this, help me do this thing, right? And so it's a conversation that people are expecting to have with the product that they're trying to use, as opposed to like figuring out which sequence of menu items to go and click. And so all of that requires a pretty big re-architecture of how we're thinking about things, how we design products, how these interfaces will show up, because that will suddenly become the new paradigm, because that's how
Mhm.
people are now interacting with GPT or Perplexity and other tools like that. So that's one component, like really understanding what data exists in our system today, what more should we add, what capabilities exist, what more can we add, and how do we leverage that into building better products that we're already working on. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it, I guess, is what we're talking about here. How does this impact my day to day as a program manager, right? How can I use these tools to be better at my craft? How can I use this to automate a lot of things that I'm doing today that then allows me or gives me the leverage and bandwidth to operate at a higher level of the value chain, right? And so really use these insights, these things that the system or the agent or whatever is signaling, and say, hey, I think this is what we should think about, or this is a risk that I think is getting flagged, and so we should start planning for that, or this is a dependency that's probably going to like not meet its objectives, so we should plan for that. So those kinds of like higher value added things is what we should be doing. And so how do we create that, right? How do we cultivate that culture of learning about these tools, utilizing them in our day to day, increasing our productivity, and then really thinking about higher value stuff? So those are the two ways, or two really tactical ways of how this is going to manifest in our day to day very quickly. And so for each of them, that requires a slightly different solutioning, but happy to go into that later, and I'll maybe stop
Yeah.
here and love to hear Priyanka as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about being a leader today, right, there's so much that's shifting all the time. Now, this, even with generative AI, the pace of change that is happening is also so rapid. And so as a leader, that is one of the things that, besides understanding, okay, how does this change? How do we, how does this impact our teams? How does this impact our product? You're also thinking about this is going to constantly change. So how do we continue to adapt to something that is going to change? Say you say, okay, we're going to fine tune a model here today because this is what our customers need and this is what we have identified. However, with like the models changing rapidly as well, some of the things are now going to be done by the generic models available as well. So now
Yeah.
how do you pull that in and then again iterate on it? And so what I think of things, right, like AI is sort of in a way supercharging the IQ piece of the work we do, right?
Mhm.
And then at the same time, besides what Arvind said, I feel like as leaders, you still need to continue to like enhance on the EQ aspects, so like emotional intelligence, your emotional
Mhm.
because you will still be working with people. You're going to go do these higher, more strategic things. You are the ones who are still going to have conversations with people. And so AI can do some of these things, and you need skills around working with people and understanding, managing your stakeholders, especially in a very cross-functional role, like program management. Then I think of like there's EQ, and then there is this notion. I kind of think of it as adaptability quotient. I heard this from
Mhm.
another founder, and so I'm just going to steal that. But I feel like it fits perfectly here because you have to, as a leader, be very adaptable, and not just you, but then you have to work with your teams and help them understand that this change is going to happen, because it's hard for sometimes teams to um, constantly have and shift or pivot sometimes. And
Mhm.
while you don't want to do that constantly, you still need to have a way where you can work with your team and say, here are the reasons why we are moving. And so have it being adaptable themselves, but also helping their teams to be able to manage the change quickly
Mhm.
is something that leaders would need to do. And I think it's will probably influence their styles as well.
Yeah. I think change is always constant. I think that's the mantra that I always go with. Change is always constant. But in this current market where we are hearing, oh, AI will replace all these program managers. I mean, that's the statement that is thrown around multiple times. AI can do all of this. You can. So, as a leader, it does, how does that impact emotional empathy that you just mentioned, Priyanka? As a leader, how do they help the team to say that, hey, this is how you should upskill yourself, and AI is not going to take away your jobs, but you have to adapt and be more having those additional skills. Like, how do they be able to motivate?
Uh, it's important to recognize that things will change, like you said, right? There will be changes happening to any roles. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
program management. Um, and at the same time, like one of the things, I do get this question a lot from people I talk to. And I always think of like, think about the things that you are doing today that technically could be done by AI. And think about like, do you even like doing those things? So I'll take a very mundane example, taking notes. That was something that, I mean, most people don't like doing. AI can do it great, right? Right. And I'm like so happy. Like today I don't have to take notes. This whole AI note taker is in my meetings or whatever. This is great. Like then what I can focus on is really having this conversation, really focusing on the person and like getting curious. That sometimes I feel like getting curious is something we don't do as much. And so if you're not like distracted by having to take notes, now you're much more invested in the conversation itself. So those are like nuanced things that I feel will really get like you can do more of. And so who wants to do this 20-30% of the job that actually AI can do? I can go on and do better things. And so my way, at least in terms of how I think leaders can motivate, is
Mm-hmm.
like think about what are the other skills, how you can go on to do bigger and better things. Be involved in these like strategic things that AI is not going to be able to do. And that's where the skilling is. So skilling
Mm-hmm.
could be on the EQ side of things, people skills, soft skills, those things like working with people is still going to be important. It could be the adaptability portion. How do I do that? It could be like just getting curious and like thinking about what comes next. Sometimes when we are in this mundane day-to-day tactical things, you don't get time to think of what happens if this, how can I think outside the box. And so pushing yourself on those things, I feel, are really important. And that is the skill, or that is the vision that a leader can show their teams. And then the final thing I would say is, uh, don't be tied to the titles or a particular like role title. The skills that individuals have developed, those skills can still be leveraged. It can be leveraged in a different title, it can be leveraged in a different context. So as you upskill, obviously, from technical or people skills perspective, think about those skills and not necessarily like a specific title, and that just opens up the doors for you in terms of whatever you want to do.
Totally makes sense. Arvind, as a leader who is currently doing some performance cycles and whatnot, right? So, how do you handle such conversations with your team?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Priyanka. I mean, you have to look at those aspects that actually can be very quickly, like automated away, or there's a tool that's available, or there's an agent that's available that's going to take care of those like lower value items, right? And then where you're completely engaged in a conversation, and it's actively for taking notes and following up with the AI action items and all of that. And so I think what we continue to bring to the table, and which might be the hardest thing for any system like this to replicate, is that emotional quotient, right? And so we play a pretty significant role in making sure that there is a happy, a healthy, a mission aligned, a productive team culture, and that's a big part of what we do as well. And so I don't think like you can really replace that, right? And so that is and how it manifests is in the simplest of things. Like I know that maybe this whole engineering team worked on this incident for the entirety of yesterday night, and so I'm not going to go and follow up with action items like the very next day morning, right? But an AI is probably just going to look at the time and say, boom, like why did the RCA not get submitted, right? And so I think those kinds of things are very, very important. And then when you work across global teams that have so many cultures kind of mixing across each other, there's a lot of things that are unsaid, right? There are things that are in the silences. There are things that are between the lines that again an agent or a tool or a model can't really understand even. So how do you do that, and how do you continue to build that social capital? How do you build those relationships wherein you can elicit this information, and that can be then used to figure out, okay, I'm going to approach this individual in a certain way, I'm going to approach this team in a slightly different way. And so all of that organizational intelligence, that's going to be the hardest one to like really like mimic, right? And so how do you continue to do that is really utilizing all of these agents to fast track your learning. A really good point that Priyanka brought up, the curiosity, which I'm also actually a little worried about, that we have these short circuits to learning, and so I'm hoping that we continue to use it in the right way, and that pursuit of excellence, that pursuit of knowledge is not lost on us, right? And so if we can continue to do that, if, for example, if we use Cursor as a tool, and then go into the code base and ask, hey, can you explain this whole thing and what it's doing, and actually now suddenly start to get intelligent about how these systems are actually getting built, without having to spend 45 minutes to 1 hour talking to an engineer, or like taking time away from their productive day. And Cursor can basically tell you that, or you can maybe put a technical design document into Notebook LM and ask questions of it. I think that's where you supercharge your learning very quickly, and then start to have those conversations which are meaningful with these other engineering teams and people. And then you layer on this EQ quotient as well, and then that's, I think, why it would be super difficult to replace a role like this. But that does not mean that a lot of the things that we do today will get automated. And so if you are in roles where the only thing you're doing is like tracking certain things and talking to some other teams, and then doing this coordination kind of thing, those are the types of roles that I think you should get a little worried about and ask, okay, how do I elevate myself? Like, I can't keep doing these things, because at some point some automation will come in, some agentic software will come in and start doing these things. So those are the roles where I think we should really start and think, how do I go up the value chain? How can I fast charge my learning? How do I then use that to actually be very meaningful to the organization?
Great. That's really great. And having that distinction to understand, like, not everything is going to go away. What are your skills? Where can you apply your skills to uplevel yourself actually matters. So now coming into the core of it, AI and technical program management. So cross-functional technical programs often struggle with visibility, tracking, and a lot of communication, over communication, under communication, all sorts of it. So how do you think AI can help in tracking and manage these complex technical programs? Priyanka, on your first with you for your best practices.
Yeah, I feel like even before AI comes in, I think there needs to be clarity on what are we doing here? What is the framework, practice, or system that we are trying to automate? Because you cannot automate something that you're not clear on. You need
That's
to
right.
know exactly what needs to be done in order for the tracking or provide the visibility, who needs the visibility. And so I think that's where the human component will come in. The expertise that you have today needs to come in order to first build that system, I would say. And then, yes, I think like if you have have it set up correctly, it can like you can have an agent, like I guess TPM agent kind of a thing, which takes the notes, creates the tasks, tracks the tasks, and spits out a dashboard or email somebody. I mean, you could potentially do all of those things and help with increased visibility and tracking. And I still feel on top of it, you still need the human to provide a little bit more like human component to it, which is like having these conversations with stakeholders. What does this mean? Because here's the thing that I'm worried about actually with if we are trying to automate a lot of this is as humans, we are also very good at tuning out things. So I wonder if the AI is going to ping you to do something, are you going to ignore it? Which you may not ignore a human, but you might start ignoring the AI. So those are the things that we have to be careful about. So yeah, that's kind of my initial thinking around, yes, it can really help with visibility and tracking. And at the same time, we really need to be clear on how we want it to do that, and what happens in between those automated pieces of workflows that we have put together. And I also always say this with any tracking system or anything, be it AI or non-AI, is like, if it's garbage in, then it's garbage out. So you got to be very careful with that.
That's totally true. Arvind?
Yeah, so I started off saying that I'm part of an organization where we don't do a lot of these KPIs and OKR type of stuff, and part of the reasons also that we believe in that is when we start measuring to a certain thing, then everything starts to get optimized to that goal, that number, right? And then we kind of forget about the beauty of the craft, like really creating excellence in products and all of that. And so that's a pretty interesting line of thought, and which is again shaping our culture as well. And so I agree with like Priyanka that the moment you start to instrument something or put it in the dashboard or visualize something, then everything seems to be about like optimizing for that and showing that that's green and in the clear. And so we have to figure out like how do we still create systems, instrumentation, monitoring, and all that that'll give you information, but then you add the human element on top of it, and then make the right call on based on that. So to further maybe answer your question, one thing that I think these systems can probably help is really looking at pattern recognition, right? And so one of the biggest challenges any organization faces is the large number of systems and tools and all of that we all use, right? And so tracking could be in Jira, it could be in spreadsheets, a lot of decisioning could be happening in Slack, in Teams. A lot of the data, the code might be sitting in GitHub or other, Visual Studio repositories. So all of this is like spread across so many different systems and tools and all that, and they all don't interact with each other really well. And so if the system that we build can actually take in data from all of these aspects and then start to look at how patterns are starting to emerge, and then give us predictability and say, hey, this might be happening, you may want to look at it. I think that would be pretty powerful, right? So for example, if you're starting to notice a pattern where a few of your releases from a certain team are starting to get rolled back every now and then, and so sure, it might be like in the next like monthly operational review or something that it comes up, but can these types of systems actually start to detect that, hey, maybe this particular code path does not have really good automation test coverage, or the testing is not being done properly? Can we increase the test coverage, or that there's something else going on, there's a team issue there, or maybe there is a quality issue with product requirements, or how we're designing systems, maybe the right level of seniority of engineers are not there, right? So those types of like insights or predictability if like these systems can actually bring up, I think then you can act on it and ask the hard question of why is it happening, and like how do we really go and think about solving for them. And then really looking at like anomalies in the system as well, right? Like when even before these I mean, I know we have like like multiple teams of people who are monitoring dashboards and looking at spikes and all of that, but sometimes what I've also seen in organizations is you instrument too many different things, and then the graph looks pretty normal, but it might be because one metric is spiking and the other is really dropping, and then it normalizes to actually being a straight line, and then everyone thinks, oh, nothing's going wrong. But if these systems can actually monitor those kinds of anomalies and say, hey, something's actually like freaking the system out, and maybe we want to look at it, those are the types of things that would be like super super useful. So really pattern recognition, and then I'm also curious to understand like how um, NLP type of models can also apply, but that may be a harder frontier to get to. But I think even these smaller things about like really looking at bringing data together from disparate systems, looking at patterns, surfacing anomalies, that'll be a really good use case.
Great. And I think it will also help in the agile execution and release planning as well, right? Like these insights, we could also think through on what else we should be thinking about. Like every sprint is 2 weeks, so should we be releasing within those 2 weeks, or what else we should be thinking about? And what are the best practices of integrating like AI into these agile models and agile release workflows?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of adds on to what Arvind was saying, right? You have to really look at what are these patterns and things like that. And I feel like where AI can really do, really help us augment our work is looking into the future. Because especially in program management, and when we are thinking about release or execution, what are we trying to look for? We are trying to look for, is anything going to become a problem? Is there a risk that's coming up? You're constantly trying to look ahead and predict a risk so that you try and mitigate it and it doesn't happen. And so if AI can help with not just like doing analysis on the past, but also saying, catching something earlier than a human can, I mean, that would be great, right? That would really help us. But until then, like, we have to look at multiple points of data and think about that. One of the things that I think, as we think about just AI, integrating AI into our workflows, be it execution, release, all of these things, is you have to know that AI still has certain like limitations, or it's a non-deterministic entity. So it's not always going to say 1 + 1 is 2. I mean, at 99 out of 100 times it might do that, but that one time it might make a mistake, and you don't want to completely just give into it and figure out. So you have to have more than just the practices around implementing AI. Is like, how do you ensure that there is accuracy? How do you validate and verify the information that is coming out of it? And this is not just, I think of this in also in a further future, where you have AI agents working alongside software engineers or other functions. And now you're working with human coworkers and you're working with AI coworkers, and even that needs to be understood. And so I don't know if I have like a list of best practices for that, but one thing I would say is that you have to know that AI is still non-deterministic. So it's not going to always give you the same answer or the right answer. And so if you're looking for that in your systems and processes when you're automating, then you have to be careful and figure out what is the right way to go do it.
That's great.
So a couple of things I might add there is, I think very tactically as well, right? Like, if you're going into a space that you've never worked in before, it's a new domain, then you can definitely go and ask it, hey, how do I maybe think about this as a program? Like, for example, I've done this in the past when I've been called to, program manage a pretty large event that company was running. And so one of the things we were asked to do was really maybe try and think about a pre-mortem before this event happened. And so I had not done anything like that in the past. And so the first port of call for me was really asking GPT about, like, how would you think about running a pre-mortem for such a large event that's happening? And so I gave it all the details, and it basically gave me an exceptionally good detailed analysis, or a framework to kind of use to think about many, many, many different things. And so it probably would have taken me, like, 3 or 4 days of full-on research to actually come up with that. That gave me, that it actually spit out in maybe like 3 minutes, right? So that's, I think, what we can do. And so even if you, for example, have worked in a specific domain and you're going to launch a new product, all it takes maybe is 30 seconds to ask this tool to say, hey, can I get a launch checklist based on previous data, based on historic performance of these projects, based on how we have rolled out things in the past and rolled back things, based on this team's history. What else should I be thinking about when I'm going to launch this thing, right? And what does the checklist look like? What are additional elements to the checklist, just depending on, based on this, the domain, the team, the technology, the country. So you can start to use that to get really insightful stuff as well when it comes to like release planning and all of that. And then I think we talked about like predictability, like using historic data, and then maybe getting a little bit of a peek into the future, and thinking about like doing pre-mortems, right? So what could go wrong? How do we plan for that? And building the right kind of checklists and all of that.
Great. And those insights are really helpful, because for any program manager, it is everyone has this big laundry list of this launch items, but some things can be missed, and AI could actually guide them or help them with a predefined template, and say, hey, this is something that you might want to look at, which might be helpful in that situation or may not be, it is not relevant. So the next one is about the communication pieces of it. So with generative AI, it can actually create our documents and help you fine tune the executive summaries and whatnot. So with the AI and stakeholder alignment and the communication, how do you think AI is actually? Do you think it is already helping the team with these communications, or it's still a long way to go? On transparent, Priyanka, your thoughts on transparency and decision making?
I do feel like AI gives you a jump start in doing some of these things. So, for example, sending out a weekly report, providing a progress update or something like that. can seem like a tedious task. And you can leverage AI to like just say, pull in all of this data or some insights and things like that. And so maybe it saves you time there, I would say. And at the same time, you want to send a communication out that is still sounds like you. So I think that is the biggest thing in terms of transparency, I would say. I mean, it might be okay, it depends on the culture, but like, okay, obviously I've leveraged AI to pull this thing together. But here are like my thoughts and my insights on this, because that is always the core part of any communication report or document. It's not just like presenting a data from one place and putting it in another. It is like, what do I do? Like, so what? Like I always said to my teams, any document you're sending, any email you're sending, like if you're, the main reason you're sending it for, like if it raises more questions, then it's not a great piece of communication. And so if you have to be able to answer like, so what, at every little thing that you are writing, like, so what if I know this, right? For a leader, that's important because they want to say, how do I make this data useful? And that leads into your decision-making question as well, which is any communication you're putting out, it should help further a particular decision. I mean, that's what maybe leaders are looking for, is what do I do with this data? And then how is it going to help me in XYZ decision itself? So is it improving or the speed at which we can generate these reports? Sure. Do you still need to be involved? Yes, absolutely. I think you can train the model to be more like you, to have your voice, so that you have to do less post-processing on it. But I would say it's very important to not lose your communication touch. I think that is one of the very, very important skills for anybody in the corporate world or otherwise, is that yes, AI can really help you with a lot of things, but don't lose the skill of communication. That is really important.
Right. Arvind, any additional thoughts?
So again, tactically, what I use a lot of this for is also personalizing the communication, right? Especially in our roles, we communicate with the C-suite quite a bit. And so the really good thing is for most of our C-suite here, they have published what they call blueprints. So how do you interact with them? What is important to them? How do they communicate? And so you can actually give all of that information to agent that you're building and say, here is a person that I'm trying to communicate with. Here are the things that they're looking for and something that we send them. And here is the communication that I'm going to send. Give me a critique based, and be very harsh with the critique and say what is working, what is not working. And so that's been like super useful for me, right? And then I've had people on the team, for example, who are again sending out like really important communication to then figure out how do we really message this in the right way. And so they've used tools like Grammarly and others. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can hear you.
We can hear you, Arvind.
Madhuri or Priyanka, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, or maybe
maybe
Arvind cannot hear us.
Okay, for some reason I was not able to hear you folks, so hopefully sure. It's still coming in loud and clear. But yeah, folks use Grammarly as a tool to maybe ask the or prompt them to say, analyze this communication from a readability of grade 5, right? And so how do you create simple, easy to read sentences? Again, especially if, for example, English is like not your first language, and then so all of these types of things are where I think this will be super useful.
Awesome. We have been discussing about a lot of tools. I think when we share about these key takeaways, there are already a lot of tools in the market right now, like Grammarly, Claude, and everything, which is actually helping the team from a very tactical and also strategic perspective, which actually helps them, aid them to do their job better.
Yeah.
So So looking ahead, where do you think AI is evolving in the next 3 to 5 years from a program management perspective? What's your take on that, Priyanka?
Yeah, I feel, I mean, it's getting better every day as we can look at it. And there are so many companies and startups also looking into um, identifying how to uh, automate a lot of the things, the workflows that happen in program management, because it doesn't just
Mm,
impact, like we talk about program management because that's kind of like the function that's very close to us. But when we think about execution and strategic execution, right? Even for engineering managers, for example,
mhm,
there's so much information coming their way, and they have to keep on like, okay, who on my team is doing what, or what are some of these other programs coming in? So they are also sort of involved in this product management. So for all of these folks, like companies are working on improving these tools, and I think as we start getting better at understanding what can be automated and what cannot be, because I said, right, like you have to be very clear on what is it that the AI should do, because that's the
mm,
only way you can verify the output of it as well. And so that can, I feel like it can do that, and we can create a bunch of different agents out of it that can handle specific workflows. So one example, like I use the note taking example, right? AI is doing that today, but then what happens next? What happens with those notes? Today we don't
mm,
have a very seamless way of doing it, but maybe there is an agent that comes in and says, oh, taking these notes, now I can create tasks and assign them to the right people, or maybe there is some other more complex step or something like that that was discussed, and so maybe that gets done. Maybe some of those action items don't even have to be done by humans, they can be done by AI. Maybe there were certain decisions that were made, and sometimes, people who are not in the meeting or who forget what decisions were made, there is some place where everything is documented. So some of these like practical examples, these are the ones that I can think of. Another is just like, a lot of times we have different tools for planning and different tools for execution. And so what a company leaders might be planning on, they might be using something different. And then how does that roll down? How do people know that what I'm working on is laddering up to this particular goal that we have? Um, and so maybe AI can help with those aspects. So I do feel like the AI agents will get better. And then eventually you might again work with people and then also work with AI agents in order to get your job done.
mm. Arvind, not sure if you heard the question. So this is about where do you see AI evolving in the next 3 to 5 years for program management?
Mm. Um, yeah, that's an interesting one. What I'm really looking at is, all the developments that are happening, for example, in the agentic software world. I think that's probably what Priyanka was touching on as well. Like OpenAI, launched that Operator product,
Mm,
and I know it's in a limited beta release or whatever, but like really fascinated by what it could do. Obviously, from a personal standpoint as well, like if I'm looking to, buy a concert ticket when it's going going live, and then I can maybe put an operator to it. Two, where like we talked about earlier, where information today exists in so many different systems across the enterprise, and so maybe an operator, I mean, maybe you don't even need to connect everything. Maybe the operator can actually automate some of these things that you're doing, where you might be copying a GitHub project task into a spreadsheet or into a different project tracking tool, and all of that, stuff that takes a lot of the time can actually be automated to a certain extent. Or for example, if a significant chunk of your work gets done in Slack, and then the simplest thing you can do is either say that I want to maybe track this as a thing, or follow this specific decision or communication point, or react to it in a way where this all gets consolidated as a status report at the end of the week. So those are the types of things that'll be very interesting and very tactical, as to like what I see in the next maybe year or so. Um, and then yeah, I think being able to custom create agents for like our own specific needs as well, right? Like I talked about, creating agents and avatars of some of our leaders, and then asking it questions on, would this comms really make sense to you, or maybe like other things as well, where a lot of the business processes start to get automated. So all of those are, I think, where we'll really go from here. What I'm worried about, though, a little bit is, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, is I worry about the curiosity aspect, the pursuit of craftspersonship, the pursuit of excellence may be dying down a little bit, because you have this short circuited learning journey. I was reading this really interesting stat about Stack Overflow, where the number of questions that are getting submitted to SO is getting significantly reduced over the last year. And so no new questions are being asked, no new solutions are being explored. And because GPT or other tools have already indexed all of the stuff that's already there, people are quickly going to GPT or Cursor and getting code and plugging it into their thing. But because new stuff is not getting created, new questions are not being asked, and new solutions are not being explored, at some point we all will just start to copy each other, and then that would be the limit at which learning will stop, and then no more knowledge is actually getting created. And so that's what I worry about a little bit, right? And so can we get out from that, getting into that rut, and then really fast charge, use this as a productivity thing to like fast charge our learning? That's what I hope will happen, but definitely a worry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I was reading of something that was like decay. Are we going to have this decay of AI? Because think about this, right? Like AI has learned from everything that humans have created. And so now if we are just pulling out the same thing and there's nothing new, nothing novel, now if the AI continues to learn that, because usually there is a continuous learning cycle, it's going to learn nothing new. And so I sometimes I do feel this when I'm using GPT. Is like, is it getting dumber than before? Like, I don't know if you have had that feeling, but I think it speaks to what the point you're making, Arvind, here, which is very, very crucial.
Yeah. And for the aspiring program managers who want to thrive in this AI-driven world, be it just out of college grads or mid-career professionals who wants to thrive in this world, what is your advice that would help them? A piece of advice, Priyanka?
Well, I'm gonna just say what Arvind was saying, which is curiosity. I think that that thirst for knowledge, I think you need that continuously. You can learn some of the technical skills, you can learn some of these chops that, program management chops, product management chops, whatever. But that aspect of like wanting to know more, I think is very important in this world. And then like the other things I'd mentioned, which I'll just reiterate, is your communication skills, your people skills. I think those are going to be important. Strategic thinking is going to be important. You still have to think. I mean, you can't outsource all of your strategic thinking to AI as well. So those are the skills I would say are really important for anybody who's sort of aspiring to come into this field, and also know that the field is going to evolve as well, just like a lot of the knowledge-based functions are doing today.
Arvind, on upskilling or adaptability, again, curiosity is the one driving
Yeah.
factor, but anything else that they should be thinking about?
I mean, from a pure technical standpoint, I think all of this is founded on data, right? And so having a foundational understanding of data architecture, and if you kind of go into an organization, having the right curiosity to understand how is data structured, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the ethical concerns around like how this can all work, and what are again technical challenges of pulling all of these things together. So that I think will crucial going forward, because that's really going to be the foundation of if you want to do something on the program management side, all of these disparate sources have to come together and talk to each other. So again, having a foundational understanding of how these data systems work would be pretty crucial. And then yeah, absolutely, plus 100 to like what Priyanka was saying, the emotional quotient is what will really get called on, and I guess, in the next few years. So really figuring out how can you build that, how can you continue to stay curious and learn. I think those are going to be pretty critical as well. And it's a little bit of a concern for me as well, because again, we've been doing a lot of interviewing recently, and when I ask folks about what are you curious about these days, I usually don't get a good response, which tells me that at some point, like we've just kind of gotten into this rut of like our day to day, and are not curious about and or trying to learn interesting new things. At least even maybe following what's happening in the world may be a good thing, but that I think is something that we're missing. So for new folks who are kind of coming into this journey, I'd say that yeah, that would be probably one of the biggest things, like the growth mindset, the learnability aspects, the curiosity, and what are you tinkering with would be what really sets you apart.
Yeah, I think that the growth mindset that you just mentioned, right? Like that is something everyone should be imbibing because that's what sets us apart. Be a lifelong learner. It is okay. You are not a master of everything. You have to learn, even though you know about it. Technology is upcoming. Something new is always there. So having that growth mindset helps for both as an individual contributor and also for the leaders. And this has been such a rich discussion on AI's impact on program management and leadership. And a huge thank you to both of you, Priyanka and Arvind, and for sharing your expertise. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It
thank
was
you.
a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.